The second issue that we have to discuss today, and it's been discussed just about every week, but we still don't discuss it enough, is the number one issue facing America today, and that is the people flowing across the southern border. Our office has been in contact with the Border Patrol. They do not see any change in the people coming across the border. I want to remind people in the last month for which we have statistics, and the press should be waiting for the next month's numbers to come out. In April, we were at 205,000 migrants remaining on the interior, and that's before you count another 30,000 paroled from Cuba, Haiti, and Central America. So an all-time record for that month. With it, as always, comes about 9,000 unaccompanied minors. I mean, if we found an unaccompanied 12-year-old running around the street at night, we'd think that was a scandal. But every month we let another 8,000 or 9,000 unaccompanied minors come into this country. So I call upon the press corps to finally report the number of people who come across this May and make a guess at the number of additional who are being paroled. A year ago in May, we were at 196,000. Now what you have to do is you have to take the official number, add up the gotaways, and then you should add up those paroled to see where we stand this year. But when it comes out, it should be a banner headline and something that all Americans should be deeply concerned about. Whether you're talking about illegals committing crimes, whether they're putting pressure on local budgets at the school board, whether they're changing the culture of America. Because I think worldwide, most people do not have the respect and love for freedom that we do in this country. But for whatever purpose, this is a real tragedy and something that's going to permanently change America. So I beg the press corps to give us a banner headline and see where this May's figures line up with, or the May figures line up with those of a year ago. Thank you. The next issue that hasn't been talked about anywhere near enough concerns what's going on in the Middle East. You know, one more time when I leave here today, I'm going to see protesters saying that the Arabs who live in Gaza, they call them Palestinians, need their own country. And they're living in some sort of horrible situation in a country. Even though Israelis don't live there, Israelis have ultimate control over the Gaza Strip. In a report, which was in a story that was underreported, but we all should be aware of, recently another agreement was reached with Israel and another country around the world to bring more people, non-Jewish people, into Israel to perform work in this wonderful country. I have had the privilege to go to Israel. I've seen what they've done at their border along the Jordan River, about all the immigration that happens, about all the industry that's going on there. But in any event, it appears as though under a recent agreement, immediately 2,000 people from Ecuador on the other side of the world are agreeing to come to Israel to work. And under this agreement, there is a hope that eventually they work their way to 25,000 people from Ecuador coming to Israel. Now that is in addition to a sea of other people who are already there. From India, from Thailand, from Philippines, from China, from Nepal, from Sri Lanka, from Moldova, from Malawi, from Kenya, all around the globe, people are coming to Israel to work. Nevertheless, there's some malcontents in this country who feel that it is difficult living in a country adjacent to Israel, a country in which, by the way, people in Gaza, many of them had an opportunity to work in Israel where they were making better wages, probably safer jobs than almost anywhere else in the Arab world. I hope, I haven't seen it anywhere in the newspaper, I hope the press picks up on this story that 25,000 people from Ecuador are hopeful to come to this country. Israel in so many ways reminds me of the United States, right? In the United States, we have hundreds of thousands of people crossing the southern border. We have just a little bit shy of 1 million people being legally sworn in to becoming new citizens in America every year from all over the globe. Nevertheless, we have people in this chamber, actually earlier today, making a claim that America is a horrible racist country and we have to do something to fundamentally change it because it's so bad. So just like people make fun of this country when the whole rest of the world would rather live here apparently than everywhere else, I hope the press picks up the point that we have people from all around the globe coming to Israel, that another 25,000 people from Ecuador want to come here, and that would give an indication what it's really like to live in Israel, even from countries that are not primarily Jewish. Now, we're going to pick up another story that I think probably the border right now is the number one issue that the United States has to deal with. But under normal circumstances, when I talk to people back home, they tell me that things in America are getting worse, particularly when you get my age, when you get up to 60, 65, they feel that when they were growing up, America was a better nation, and they wonder what happened. And when I ask them why they think it's a better nation, they hesitate for a minute, but finally they say, I think we've had a breakdown in the family, okay? And it's true, particularly when you get to older people. We went from in 1960, about 95% of the newborn births had both a mother and father at home, to more recently, only about 60% had a mother and father at home. So we've had a dramatic decrease in the number of children born without a mother and father. Now, any type of family can be successful, but common sense and the statistics will tell you it would be nicer if you had a father at home. Nevertheless, we're going the opposite direction. Now, you may say, Glenn, why are you even wasting time on that? Everybody's for the old-fashioned family. I mean, why do you spend time on that? And actually, if you look, there have been people who over a period of time have felt that the road to paradise necessarily means getting rid of the nuclear family. We know Karl Marx himself, which is still studied in our universities. Karl Marx was opposed to what he referred to as the bourgeois family, and he felt it would vanish as a matter of course when it's will vanish when capital disappears. He believes the only reason for the family is because we have private property, and that served as the basis for traditional marriage, which it didn't. But in any event, Karl Marx did want to get rid of the nuclear family. Now, we look forward, and did anybody else carry this odious thing? Is it just a guy who died almost without family, not missed at the time he passed away? No. I think we have to turn to the 1960s when we started the Great Welfare, the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. And at that time, there were some leaders who were very common to anybody who lived through that area who did want to get rid of the family. The first person I'll mention is Kate Millay. Maybe some people aren't familiar with Kate Millay. She was one of the primary feminists during the 1960s. And I bet to this day, most Americans are under the mistaken impression that people like Kate Millay were a force for good. But actually, Kate Millay, we should all be aware, was another person who wanted to, quote, destroy the American family. In a back and forth with one of her audiences, she demanded, how do we make a cultural revolution? And she felt we needed a cultural revolution. And her followers said, by destroying the American family. And she said, how do we destroy the American family? By destroying the American patriarch. In other words, by getting the man out of the family. So in the 1960s, one of the most prominent feminists, Kate Millay, and her comments were echoed by others, felt she had to destroy the American family. At the same time, we had a Black Power movement, which I don't think was embraced by the vast majority of Black Americans, but it did exist, and one of the primary leaders of that Black Power movement was Angela Davis, and anybody who lived in the 1970s remembers that name. And what was Angela Davis for? She wanted to one of the things she was for, she wanted to get rid of the family-based structure of oppression. In other words, she as well felt a mother and father at home raising their children was a form of oppression. Women must be liberated from the drudgery of full-time childbearing. And she was given a great job at San Diego, I believe it was San Diego State University, where the left made sure she had a nice job for the rest of her life, even though she participated or abetted murders that took place in California at the time. So we have to remember that one of the things that Angela Davis wanted, I guess she's primarily remembered for being black, but she also wanted to get rid of the nuclear family. More recently, we have had, now, how could one get rid of the family? I think Lyndon Johnson, at a time when these radicals were flying high, hit upon it by introducing a lot of subsidies in America as part of his Great Society. And in order to get these societies, not always, but almost always, you could not have a mother and father together. Because if you had a mother and father together, you'd be earning enough money that you wouldn't be considered in poverty. But once you were in poverty, you were eligible for a variety of government subsidies that you wouldn't get if you had a mother and father at home, and let's say that father was making, say in today's income, $50,000 or $60,000. Whether it's food stamps, whether it's low-income housing, whether it's daycare, whether it was at the time AFDC, whether it was a hugely poorly done subsidy, the Earned Income Tax Credit, which kicked in the 1990s. All of these benefits were conditioned upon not having a man in the household earning a decent income. There were probably some exceptions, and my detractors will point out somewhere a mother and father and kids at home that get these subsidies. But by and large, they were subsidies not available to a family with a man and woman who both worked, or with one of the two working and making a decent wage. Now, in this budget that President Biden has put forth, we have a variety of new programs, almost all of which are adding to the marriage penalty that the Great Society ushered in. And by the way, when you look at that marriage penalty, it varies from person to person depending how many jobs they took up. It varies depending upon their income, whether you're not working at all, whether you're making $14,000 or $15,000 a year. There's usually a huge medical benefit as well. But what do we do in light of this, of all these programs? And Robert Rector, who's an expert on this field, believes there are 78 programs that all are working towards a marriage penalty, all working towards the world that Kate Millay or Angela Davis or Karl Marx were looking for. And by the time you got done, it could be 15, it could be 20, it could be 25, it could be $30,000 that you would lose if you were a married couple, as opposed to having a single person raising the children at home. Now, you would think that ultimately people would wake up and look at all the, in general, not in every case, but in general, possible problems that we had with the government encouraging not having two people working in the home. By the way, another one I should point out is something called Pell Grants. Pell Grants are grants that go to children if they can say the custodial parent is in poverty. They might have a father making $100,000 a year, who knows, but Pell Grants is another program kind of pushing in that direction. I'll repeat an anecdote I've talked about before, but before we expand Pell Grants, we ought to think about it. I used to talk about the marriage penalty about 12 years ago in Wisconsin at a variety of tea parties. And I would go through all the programs that you got, provided you didn't get married and had a low income. I talked to a young woman afterwards who was in the audience. I had been talking to a Tea Party group, and anybody familiar with the Tea Party at the time were largely a bunch of people over 60 years old. But we had a young gal who was there tending bar in the room where I gave the talk. I'm guessing she was 25 years old. And I asked her what she thought about this marriage penalty and all these programs. And she told me, well, me and my husband, we got married before we had a child. But she said, none of my friends are getting married, they get free college. And that was kind of my introduction to Pell Grants, in which the government, for whatever reason, has decided to say that if you are not married to someone with an income, you are eligible to go to college, as well as your children may be eligible as well to get Pell Grants, well as the middle-class kid, the kid who's raised by a couple who maybe has a middle-class income. They may not be able to afford college for the kid. That kid's got to take out student loan debt. But again, Pell Grants, another program kind of designed to push America more towards the paradise that some of these people, their so-called paradise, in which we do not have a mother and father at home. In any event, in President Biden's budget, he wants to expand government daycare, expand the earned income tax credit, which can easily give you $6,000 or $10,000 if you have a couple of kids, provided you don't have two parents working or anybody making more than $16,000. I should point out that all these programs not only discourage marriage, they discourage work. Because usually, to get the most out of these programs, you want to work and make $14,000 or $15,000 or $16,000, but you sure don't want to make $40,000 or $50,000 because they'll take away your benefits. He wants more housing subsidies as opposed to, staying with mom. He wants to expand these Pell Grants that I just talked about. So I encourage my Republican colleagues to stand up against President Biden's goal of further subsidizing and further trying to break down the old-fashioned family. By the way, I mentioned all the people whose goal it was to get rid of the nuclear family. I should include Black Lives Matter in that group that wanted to get rid of the so-called Western prescribed nuclear family, which is really not Western. It happened all around the world. But that is a more recent group that had as one of its goals, Black Lives Matter, to get rid of the nuclear family. So I encourage my colleagues to stand up to President Biden's goal of further taxing the middle class or taxing certain groups to further promote or subsidize the idea of raising families without both parents in the home. In any event, these are stories I wish the press would cover. This marriage penalty has been going on for 60 years, I would say, 60 years, yes, 60 years. And whenever I talk about it, nobody's heard of it. Where is the press corps? They ought to be talking about the huge penalty. And again, when I get back to my district, I find young people saying, we're not getting married because we lose the benefits. So let's have the press corps pick up on that. Let's have the press corps pick up on why Ecuador wants to send 25,000 people halfway around the globe to work in Israel, and they can ponder if things are that tough. And these people protesting out here on Independence Avenue should also consider whether or not it's so tough living in Israel when actually it's a paradise, people coming all around the globe. The next thing that I want the press to pick up on is you should be waiting every day when we get the new figures on the number of people who came across our southern border in May and report, are we getting another all-time record for May or not? I know I'm going to have to probably pick it up from some obscure government website because, again, our press corps is asleep at the switch at the issue of the decade. And finally, if we want a little upbeat thing that the press corps has not paid enough attention to, remember, June is Dairy Month. Go home and have some cheese. Thank you.
So, gentlemen, yield back.
Yes.